Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, Food Policy Council's Recipes for a Successful Start at the Local, County, and State Levels. My name is Evelyn Kelly with the Institute for Public Health Innovation and Program Manager for our Community Transformation Grant.
Good afternoon. My name is Marisa Jones, also with the Institute for Public Health Innovation, and I direct the Mid-Atlantic Healthy Eating, Active Living Cities and Towns campaign.
And today we will both serve as your moderators. The Institute for Public Health Innovation, or IPHI, is one of the newest institutes within the National Network of Public Health Institutes, an organization of 38 members throughout the U.S. IPHI provides leadership at the intersection of health by working across disciplines and sectors to develop, support, implement, and evaluate strategies to improve the public's health. With a focus on Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, IPHI strives to improve the public's health by providing a nexus for transdisciplinary collaboration that promotes health, reduces chronic disease, and builds community capacity to sustain progress. So before we dive into the content, we have a couple of housekeeping items. We would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available to watch it again at a later date. Throughout this webinar, we would like to include your voice in the conversation. So ask questions, share comments, even challenge our ideas. Use the question and answer panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player to ask questions or share comments at any point throughout the webinar. In order to ensure that all participants are able to hear clearly, all of your microphones will be muted. If you're having a hard time hearing the webinar at any point, please let us know via the chat function. We also encourage you to dial in with your phone if you're having a hard time hearing through your computer. We will answer questions for each of the presenters at the end of the webinar. Again, we encourage you to submit your questions as they arise. We will also have a few poll questions. These will pop up right on your screen and we will ask you to answer them as they arise. One of the critical questions we seek to answer today is how a Food Policy Council could benefit your community and how you can go about initiating one where you live. This webinar highlights the work of two IPHI initiatives, the Healthy Eating, Active Living Cities and Towns campaign and the Community Transformation Grant from the CDC that focuses on transforming Prince George's County communities through a health and all policies approach. Through these two initiatives, we've seen communities from around the Mid-Atlantic region begin to organize, to assess, and make recommendations about their food system. We want to share the experience of a few of these communities in order to share the knowledge with other communities at various levels of government jurisdiction who may be interested in forming or joining food policy councils. Although today's guest speakers come to us from the Mid-Atlantic region, the experiences they share can be implemented anywhere across the nation. So we thank you all for joining us here today to learn more about food policy councils. Throughout this webinar, our presenters will touch on how food policy councils promote equitable access to nutritious food from various perspectives at the local, county, and state level. They will also share different ways in which food policy councils form, why they adopted the names they have, challenges they have overcome, and tips for developing food policy councils. For participants who are new to the concept of food policy councils, or FPCs, we will provide background summarized from Mark Winnie's resources and presentations. Mark Winnie is commonly viewed as the godfather of food policy councils. Winnie says, broadly defined, food policy is a set of collective decisions made by governments at all levels, businesses, and organizations that affect how food gets from the farm to your table. Recognizing that many of these collective decisions are not made by average citizens, FPCs create a platform for participation of all stakeholders in a community food system and give them a say in constructing a system that reflects their values. Winnie views the role of food policy councils as influencing policies that promote justice, equity, and sustainability, and coordinating food system stakeholders within an area. He cautions councils to not favor projects over policies or take on the forces of multinational agribusiness. This is a map from the most recent census of food policy councils. By addressing the multiple layers of the food system from production to processing to distribution, consumption, and waste management, food policy councils and task forces identify strategies such as financing incentives for attracting grocery stores in low-income communities, alternative retail approaches such as a community support agriculture and innovative local production through urban farming and organic growing. Such findings inform and engage various levels of government to use the many tools at their disposal to improve the food environments for their communities. As you hear these presentations, think about a food system in your community and think about how a food policy council will help create the positive change needed to promote equitable access to nutritious foods. In addition, think about which level of government would be appropriate for a community to engage. Is it the local level, your own city or town, a county approach, or perhaps even a statewide food policy council that would best suit your needs? By hearing the experiences of our speakers, we hope you will learn about the opportunities and challenges presented by working at each of these levels of government. Councilman Curran will introduce us to the early stages of food policy councils, which often begin as task force. The task force in the city of Staunton, Virginia, was initiated by Councilman Curran as a member of the city government, while Margaret Morgan Hubbard's task force was initiated through a grassroots effort through the Portstown Community Health Partnership and has recently been sanctioned by a Prince George's County Council resolution. Spencer Neal and Eric Benfield will describe how their state-level food policy council, called the Virginia Food System Council, formed. Each of our presenters will have just about 12 minutes to share their experiences, and at the end of the 3 presentations, we will take questions from our participants. In addition to learning from our speakers, at the end of the webinar, you will learn about resources available to advance your work. We remind you that you can type your questions to the speakers at any point during the webinar by typing them into the chat box. So before we get into our content, we'd like to hear from you. We want to get a sense of how many of you belong to a food policy council and how many of you are interested in forming one. Our poll is now open.
So this is great. We see that a lot of folks are thinking about joining or starting a food policy council, and another large percent, about 35, so it was about 43%, and we have about 35% who are brand new to food policy councils. Then we have a smaller percentage of folks, about 16%, who are part of longer lasting food policy councils. So we're really grateful to have people at all different levels of familiarity, and hope that everyone gets something out of this webinar.
Our first featured speaker is Councilman Eric Curran. Mr. Curran was elected to City Council in Staunton, Virginia in 2012. In addition to serving on the City Council, Mr. Curran helps run Secure Futures, a Staunton-based company that develops and runs solar energy systems.
So Eric, you now have control.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So thanks so much for that introduction. I was elected about 1.5 years ago in Staunton, which is a city of about 24,000 people, and we're about 3 hours southwest of Washington, D.C. in the Shenandoah Valley, which was at one time called the breadbasket of the South, or the Confederacy. And so we are still the biggest agricultural area in the state of Virginia, which is a big ag state in the East Coast. And we have a lot of local food initiatives going on. But when I was elected, I was interested in food really as a lever to deal with a variety of issues, to deal with jobs, with the economy, with, of course, with hunger and obesity, but also with sustainability, and with community engagement in its city government. One thing that I found as a local elected official, a new one, is that quite often citizens are apathetic at best to what happens with local government until they need something, until a pothole has to be filled. But otherwise, our city council meetings, we quite often play to a nearly empty house. And so I wanted an initiative that would get citizens involved. And I found out that in this area, a lot of people care about food, not just that they enjoy eating it, but they care about how it's produced, they care about preserving it and cooking it themselves, and they care about agricultural policy as it affects our community because we have so many farmers around here. So we are a conservative community, and what The direction I decided to take was one that nobody could call big government, but instead was as much volunteeristic and inclusive of a wide variety of citizens as possible. So, Marissa, I don't seem to be able to advance the slides.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Here we go.
Okay.
Okay, Eric, you.
Okay, so.
Eric, can you go ahead and make that on full screen?
It's not full screen for you?
No, oh yeah, it is. You're good. Thank you so much. Thanks, folks.
Okay. Okay,
Anyway.
so one of the first things we did was to start a website, which is at stauntonfood.org, and I happen to be a web designer, so that was quite easy for us to do. And we've been publishing regular blog posts to let the public know about our work and to also encourage public involvement. And one of our arguments is that some people don't know why a city government should care about something like food. They think that the problem is solved, or if there are some hungry people, that food banks and food pantries and food stamps should take care of them. But that city governments should really care about things like zoning and sewers and schools. And so one of our arguments has been that, well, cities also care about economic development and tourism, and food is a big part of both of those, in our view. So we came up with 7 proposals. Working over the course of about a year, we convened last October, and we just presented these proposals for the first time to City Council last week. We want to turn our temporary food task force into a food policy council. We have a food charter, which you'll see on the next screen, which we'd like City Council to endorse. We'd like people to be able to sell food that they grow at home. We'd like to encourage edible landscaping on city lands. We'd like to allow city markets to sell crafts, which we feel would bring in more customers for food. We'd like to help people install and use rain barrels, which would help them water their gardens and have other benefits in terms of stormwater control. And we'd like to help the city offer incentives for community gardens. So this is our Good Food Charter, and we, after feedback from fellow council people and members of city government, we considerably scaled this back. Originally, we used language that our city attorney felt might get us into trouble, might require, for example, the city of Staunton to guarantee that nobody ever went hungry. And so we had to be very careful about the language we used here to make sure we weren't committing the city to things that the rest of my colleagues weren't ready to go for. So this is basically an aspirational statement that recognizes the role of food in solving a bunch of different problems, from food insecurity to providing jobs to helping protect the environment. And these faces here are some of the members of our Staunton Food Policy Task Force. We've got racial diversity, age diversity. We've got people who work in the food business and people who have nothing to do with food in their jobs. And the idea is that we all agree that local food, good food, should be an issue for the public to care about. So why should elected officials care about food policy? This is a picture of Staunton back in the day. Our city is almost 300 years old, but back when this picture was done in the last century, local food was more or less the only kind of food. Now, it's not that we want to go back 100 years, but we do want to get some of the advantages of having more local food. And so ours is a relatively conservative community, even though we're probably about 51% Democratic in elections. I mean conservative with a small c. It's not a place where people necessarily embrace change like they would in a big urban area. And so you have to present your arguments for change in a way that supports the values that people already have. One of the values people have is they don't like big government. And so whenever we talked about food policy, we'd immediately get the question, well, I don't want anybody telling me what to eat. And so we've been very clear that we're not following Mayor Bloomberg's approach. We don't want to be caught taking away anybody's big gulp. We don't want to be the food police. But it, for all the fun and games, there are some very serious issues that aren't being addressed by the current system. As great as food banks and food pantries are, and as helpful as food stamps is, even before it gets cut back, it's not enough. Those places are under too much pressure. And so in the biggest agricultural area in the state, we think it's a shame that 1 in 8 families suffers food insecurity, and more families could be coming. Despite the widely touted economic recovery, a third of all working families still struggle to make ends meet. Too many hungry people are seniors. Too many hungry people are kids. That hurts the schools, aside from hurting the kids themselves, because you'll have more absences. And you'll also have absences in workplaces because of unhealthy food and health conditions from things like diabetes and health disease. And so this costs society real money in terms of lost work time, but also healthcare expenses. We had some of our colleagues on city councils ask us, well, who is this going to feed? And we had to be honest, these proposals are not for the short term. For the short term, we're looking at food banks and food pantries and food stamps. Our proposals are really about feeding people for the next 300 years and helping people feed themselves. But they're also about creating jobs and business opportunities. They're about preserving and enhancing our quality of life. We have a lot of historic buildings and a very nicely preserved historic center. And good food is about resilience. During the derecho and after Superstorm Sandy, which was about a year ago, a lot of our families lost power for days and lost a lot of food in their freezers and fridges. And we want to make sure that when that happens again, people have access to food so they don't have to empty the grocery store shelves. This is our message again and again. We don't need big government. What we really just need is leadership and vision. For us, it's not necessarily about government telling people what to do or putting a lot of money into creating something new, but about coordinating a lot of the things that are being done already. And some of our neighboring cities, this is Roanoke, Virginia, a little bit further down Interstate 81, they have a huge weekend market that attracts people of all generations. It brings in a lot of tourists. Cities recognize that food is a big trend and something that can help them. And one of the biggest trends it's for is the generation that rural areas like ours are competing against urban areas to attract. And this is the millennial generation, the young folks today. Young folks tend to prefer big cities. They tend to leave rural areas as soon as they can, as soon as they go to college, and they don't come back. And that's because big cities are not only where the jobs are. Unfortunately, it's less and less jobs in big cities for young people. But it's really about the atmosphere that young people like. They like cafes, they like bookstores, they like walkable communities. And big cities are doing a good job of offering those things. Millennials are a little different than my generation. I followed jobs around the country for many years. What they do these days is maybe because they need less money than a lot of us do. Studies show that millennials will first find a cool place to live and then they'll find a job. And for them, a cool place has community. And it's not just about other people their own age, but it's also about a place with meaning where they can get involved in activities and make a difference giving back to the community. And for millennials, they expect food and drink to be everywhere. They tend to live in small apartments that are inexpensive, and so they spend a lot of time outside their apartments in cafes, in any public space, and they like to sit around and talk to people and eat and drink. So our messaging basically overall is that good food can pay big dividends to a city like Staunton. It can help us attract the young people that we so desperately need. It can help fight hunger, which is a shame in a community like ours that has so much food available. And it could promote prosperity, which has been an issue in rural communities for 50 years or more, as some of our best talent has gone to big cities and the highest paying jobs are in big cities. We have to be very creative about creating jobs and business opportunities, and food is one way that we can do that. So thank you very much, and Marissa, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Eric, for that presentation. As I mentioned in the beginning, we will have a question and answer period at the end of the 3 presentations, but I highly encourage you to submit your questions and comments for Eric in the chat box to the right. For those of you who may not be familiar, we're including a map of Virginia showing Staunton's location. One of the things I heard Eric speak about that resonates with me is how we have to be cognizant of our audience when crafting messages. The messages that resonate in liberal urban areas might be different than those in smaller, rural, conservative communities. We also heard from Eric the benefits of including decision makers, in Staunton's case, council members and school board members. Next, we will hear from Margaret Morgan Hubbard. Margaret is a longtime resident of Prince George's County, Maryland, and the founder and CEO of Eco City Farms. She is a task force member of Prince George's County Food Equity Council.
Hey, Margaret, you now have control. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Margaret Morgan Hubbard, as was said, and I'm going to talk about the Prince George's Food Equity Council, which is an offshoot of our policy development team and our Place Matters team of the Port Towns Community Health Partnership, which is a group of funders and community organizations and individuals who are working together to make sure that one zip code doesn't determine our health and well-being. Okay, I can't change the slides, so I need a little help. I can't change the slides.
Okay, sorry, Margaret. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, Eco City Farms is a model farm inside the Capital Beltway in Prince George's County. Our motto is that we grow great foods, farms, and farmers. Our farm is in a food desert, as is much of the area that we are working in, and that's why it's really important to us that we work on these issues. Okay, still can't change it. Okay, like many communities, Prince George's County face a number of healthy food access issues. Many people don't have personal transportation. They have limited money for food. They lack the time for finding and preparing healthy foods. They perceive food, buying prepared food as more convenient. There is fast food everywhere. 75% of our restaurants and shops are fast food. People are unfamiliar now with even food prep and cooking methods. There is resistance to changing land use ordinance, animal ordinance, food habits, residential codes and standards, and community practices. And beyond that, we are a very self-conscious community that really wants to be seen as modern, and therefore there are bans on all kinds of things, from food trucks to backyard chickens, which are allowed in New York City but not in Prince George's County. Hoop houses are not allowed. Fruit trees in open spaces and parks, cover crops on land that are not considered aesthetically pleasing. So, okay, still can't change. I need the slide change. Okay, to address these issues, we established a countywide activist food system council with the intention of taking action and making change. We named our solution the Food Equity Council. Our goals were to gain wide recognition in order to be seen as credible, broad, and deep, and representative of the larger county. There are more than 800,000 people in our county. So the first thing we did was to work on a resolution, because we decided that we wanted to be an independent council, but we wanted recognition and legitimacy from the county council. So we crafted a resolution which was endorsed by the county council that said they expressly support and endorse the formation of the Food Equity Council. We named ourselves a Food Equity Council instead of a Food Policy Council, and we will talk about that in a minute. Why did we create a council? A council is a formally constituted body of people who meet regularly to deliberate on important community matters. For us, food is a very important community matter. We all committed to collaboratively work to reverse community hunger, malnutrition, and diet-related illness in all its manifestations with new and enduring place-based system change. Why create a council? Can we go back? Okay. Okay, that's fine. Sorry. So it's very important that we want place-based system changes. So we're not just working on policy, but all kinds of ordinances, practices, procedures, and habits. We want to impact any and all decisions made by government agencies, businesses, and institutions with regard to what food, where food, and how food is produced, processed, distributed, purchased, protected, and disposed of or recycled in our county. While much food and agricultural policy is generated at the federal level, most of the land use, animal ordinances, food production, sales, waste disposal, composting regulations, and others that shape community, economic, social, and environmental health are determined and implemented at the institutional, local, municipal, county, and state levels, and those are the levels that we're working on. Although we're a food policy council at the county level, we are trying to impact all these different levels. So why did we convene it at the county level? We developed out of existing ongoing regional initiatives and local initiatives like the Port Towns Community Health Partnership and Place Matters. 80% of our county is unincorporated, although there are 27 municipalities that are distinct governments. The county has many characteristics. It's considered to have a rural tier as well as a suburban and an urban tier. We exist at Eco City Farms is at the urban tier, but all three coexist in our county. So obesity and diet-related diseases in our county impact over 70% of adults and more than half of the children. That is exceedingly high, unacceptable rates. So who comprises the Food Equity Council? We did a lot of recruitment. We sent flyers to literally many hundreds of allies in the county. We set up a process where all people could apply for membership, and we targeted outreach to the Port Towns community members and kept slots open for future applicants, particularly community members. Our Food Equity Council is inclusive of now of the entire food system, but we tried to weigh it towards those who are most impacted by the failures of the current food system, residents of food deserts and unsafe, unwalkable, unbikeable neighborhoods where food access is really problematic. So we have we draw from all of these different stakeholder groups. We had our first meeting this Saturday on Food Day at Eco City Farms, and it represents business, 19%, urban and rural agriculture, 14%, community-based organizations, 29%, institutional health and education, 19%, and government, who are not voting members but sit on the council, 19%. Okay. 73% of our county, of our members are actually residents of the county. We include non-residents because a tremendous amount of people who do work in the county and care about the county and are related to the food industry and health industry are in fact non-residents because we are in a tri-state area. In terms of the Food Equity Council, race and ethnicity, 43% are African American. Our county has 67% African American. So this is a substantial, this proportion actually underrepresents the racial makeup of the county. Hispanics make, can you go back please? Hispanics make up 9%, Hispanics and Latinos, others 5%, white Europeans 38%, and Asians 5%. So it's a very diverse group, and you can see from the distribution of age that while the 45 to 65 is the major group, we have young people and people in their 20s and 30s as well. So here are things to consider when you are recruiting members. There may be barriers to participation for many real people who care about food, but we want to make sure that we can involve people whose involvement is not underwritten by their jobs. In other words, they're not paid to come to these meetings, which many people who work in the food industry are allowed to do. There are language barriers and there are lack of formal education on food systems. So we anticipated these needs and we provide stipends for people who need them in order to take this much time out of their day. We provide interpretation and translation, and we provide training. So the next thing I want to go quickly over is why we focus on equity and why we use the word equity as opposed to policy. We use equity because of the 50 farmers markets in the Washington region. Only 2 are in our county, while 18 are in Washington alone, and Prince George's is 45 times the size of D.C. There are 16 listed in Maryland, but 12 of them are in Montgomery County alone. In our area, place, class, and race shape food access. More than 75% of all Prince George's restaurants are fast food franchises and chains. So without work on equity, where we don't stand a chance for help. This is a map of the distribution of food deserts in Prince George's, in the entire inside the Beltway area, and every single one of them, all that green, every single one of them are in Prince George's County. That's why we care about equity. And also, Prince George's, can we go back, is 63% African American and 15% Latino, while the numbers are pretty much reverse in the rest of the region, 60% European. So it is not genetics or medical care, but place that determines community health and wellness. And we are committed to dismantle these fundamental inequities and systematically address the social determinants of health. That's what our Food Equity Council is set up to do. We are the county food systems change agents, and we are going to rebuild local food systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. I encourage you to submit your questions and comments as they arise, and feel free to submit those for Margaret at this time. Here is a map of Prince George's County, Maryland. A few things I'd like to highlight from Margaret's presentation are: tap into existing community organizations. We heard from Margaret the critical role of the Portstown Community Health Partnership in forming the Prince George's County Food Equity Council, and the opportunity to work at the county level encompasses both incorporated and unincorporated land. So depending on your municipal and county structures, this could be an opportunity to have a food policy council that covers many people at once. Our final 2 presenters this afternoon are Eric Benfield and Spencer Neal. Spencer Neal is the Senior Assistant Director in the Commodity Marketing Department with the Virginia Farm Bureau Federation, working out of the state office in Goochland County. He serves as the chair of the Virginia Food System Council. Eric Benfield works as an extension specialist for community viability with Virginia Cooperative Extension. Eric is a member of the executive committee of the Virginia Food System Council, for which he previously served as chair, and served as lead author on the recently released Virginia Farm to Table Plan. Both Spencer and Eric are founding members of the Virginia Food System Council.
All right, Eric, you have control, and you are both off mute, so please take it away. Thanks.
Okay, this is Spencer Neal, and I'm actually going to kick off the discussion. Can everyone hear me all right? I'm on a speakerphone. And then Eric's going to do the slides. I'm going to run through the first few, let Eric chime in for a while, and then I'll finish it up. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the call. Obviously, as you can see, I work for Virginia Farm Bureau. This may be sort of a non-traditional area for farm bureaus, those of you that are familiar with farm bureaus. But organizationally, we decided a long time ago, several years ago, we were going to step outside of the box and engage ourselves in some different venues, build different coalitions, largely based on, we are still a big agricultural state, as Eric said, but we're also a rapidly growing urban state with large urban populations and some of the issues that come along with that relative to food. It's good to hear a lot of you are just sort of exploring forming food system councils. Basically what we're going to do is just go over little bit of the history of ours. Even if you have a council already in place, it never hurts to hear from someone else sort of the things they're doing. Obviously, we work at the state level. We're operating. And Eric, you're going too fast for me. Okay, we'll move to the first slide. And so really this sort of came out of a Virginia Food Security Summit that was convened in May of 2007 by the University of Virginia and Virginia Tech. Very large audience, had some great speakers come in from around the country. And one of the key recommendations that came out of that was to form a working group to look at the idea of forming a food policy council. I had just attended a state-long workshop, a day-long workshop in Santa Fe, New Mexico that was run by Mark Winnie. So that helped me get my hands around what food councils were all about. So we met informally for a couple of years, and in March 2009 we had our first official meeting. We adopted formal bylaws. We got our 501c3 designation on August 2012. When you look at the makeup of our council, which is the next slide, Eric, we've got 24 directors. We set a number in our bylaws, and to keep it manageable, we feel we have very broad representation, and Eric will discuss that in the later slides, sort of a little bit more about our makeup. We, again, have formal bylaws, and directors represent specific sectors of the food system from the public and the private sector. We also have additional resource organizations that attend meetings. Our meetings aren't closed by any nature, but we do have a set number of directors that make up our council. One of the challenges, all of our directors are either, they pretty much have full-time responsibilities, whether they're entrepreneurs or farmers, work for government or organizations. So it was really devising an organization that they could justify their time to really take a day to attend a meeting, which is really by the time people drive to where we meet centrally in Virginia, it pretty much takes a day out of their week. And we meet at least quarterly. Early on, we were meeting every 2 months. We have been able to maintain a strong attendance at those meetings, and it has not waned by any means. We have an executive committee of 8, including the chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer. And then we've developed and refined a committee structure, which our committees actually have defined roles, which is very important. And we've got 5 committees: education, outreach, development, which is our funding committee, research, legislative, and nominating. Some of the key early issues early on, and we all have these as we sit around the table, and these are some of the things we discussed in those early meetings before we formally became a body. One of the big ones was whether to be independent or try and have the state government sanction us through a resolution through the General Assembly. We actually had a resolution drawn up that we were going to take to the state government and form a gubernatorial or an agency-appointed board, as some states have done. We went back and forth, and ultimately we decided we were going to be an independent body, and then there are a lot of reasons for that. There are pros and cons for both, but that's what we decided to do. We have a lot of state representation, again, as Eric will touch on as we go through the slides. The other thing was whether we were going to be a policy or a system council. We deliberate a lot. Policy, for us, we have a lot of organizations within our group that are advocacy organizations, and then we have a lot of government, obviously. And we really early on decided we were going to look more at systems rather than pursue a lot of policy or legislative type action, although we definitely feel like we're a body that can influence policy either through our members or through our contacts with the General Assembly as individuals. So ultimately we became a system council. We had a lot of deliberation early on about words, and words mean a lot. One of them was sustainability, where that would fit into our bylaws and our mission statement. It took about 3 or 4 meetings because as you went around the room, everyone had a different definition of sustainability. That comes to mind sometimes with local, natural, some of those words that really everyone has a different idea what they mean. But, in forming our organization, again, words are important, and, that's seemingly innocuous, but we did spend a lot of time going through the words and how our bylaws would read, so everyone would be very clear on what our terminology was. We developed our vision and our mission, and they'll pop up right here, and I'll just read through those real quick and then let Eric take over. So our vision, it's coming.
I think I've lost.
Okay, here it is. Our vision, we envision a sustainable food system contributing to the health, economic vitality, and social well-being of all Virginians. There's that word, sustainable. Mission, working to advance a nutrient-rich and safe food system for Virginians at all income levels with an emphasis on access to local food, successful linkages between food producers and consumers, and a healthy, viable future for Virginia's farmers and farmland. So those two things, they're pretty short and succinct and really lay out what we try to do as a council. I'm going to turn it over to Eric for the next few slides, and then I'll wrap up.
Thank you, Spencer. As Spencer said early on in discussion about the formation of the council, we had a lot of discussion as to the exact makeup of the council, and particularly during 2007 and 2008, we looked at the structures or how other food system councils or food policy councils had been formed, and the actual size or composition ranged from, I think, a small of about 12 members to I think some as large as 120 participants, and that seemed a little bit unwieldy for us, but we did want to be as inclusive and comprehensive as possible, thinking about all the different sectors that interact with the food system. And as Spencer shared earlier, we do have 24 participating organizations. And one thing, particularly looking at the state food system council, we did want to have government representation as well as farmer and producer participation. So we do have representation from the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Conservation and Recreation, and we've also have reached out to other government departments as well. But then, as you see, we've tried to look at anti-hunger organizations, gleaning networks, as well as how do we get more institutional buyers involved, such as universities and distributors. And one thing, thinking about trying to get more government buy-in or institutional buy-in, early on we had conversation with Virginia's Secretary for Agriculture and Natural Resources, and also the Commissioner of Agriculture. And one thing that they emphasized is that we'll try to have some early successes, but also make sure that you're not duplicating efforts. So the council really sees itself as means for communicating and coordinating effort, and when there are opportunities for policy or projects, the council can serve sort of as an incubator to help facilitate the development of policy or projects or infrastructure that's needed to strengthen Virginia's food system and enhance the availability and accessibility of good food for all Virginians. So you can see the participating organizations. And I guess one of the challenges as a state council has been trying to get more geographic representation. In some instances, some of our directors would have to travel 6 to 7 hours just one way to attend a quarterly meeting. So that has been a challenge as we try to reach out to Southwest Virginia and other parts of the state. And I think because most people are quite disconnected from the food system, either one or two or many generations removed, we've really tried to look at what opportunities there are in promoting a more community-based food system, realizing that both a local and regional and a strong state food system, that is a win-win-win situation for everyone involved. So how do we look at the food value chain from production to consumption, as well as waste disposal, and making sure that we're protecting our natural resources at the same time we strengthen the food system. And we also realize that as we relate to the food system, that we all share some common values in trying to create jobs, protect the environment, ensure the viability of small and medium-scale farms, but then also enhancing that we have healthy individuals, healthy families, and strong, secure food system. And I think one thing that we're also, often people don't see agriculture for the potential it has for economic and community development. So we've been trying to make legislators and others aware just how foundational the food system is in moving forward. Again, we've been trying to bring together a wide variety of organizations and interests. Certainly we've had discussion where we haven't always agreed, but we've tried to work on a consensus basis to find common ground, and seeing ourselves as a bridge for on-the-ground activities. And overall, our approach is trying to look at the food system more comprehensive rather than piecemeal, and realizing that sometimes there can be divisive issues or topics, but making sure that we keep the long-term objective in mind as we discuss some of those divisive or contentious issues. And overall, we really want to enhance the availability and accessibility of healthy, nutritious food for all Virginians. And so one of the key goals and talking points, as I mentioned, we're wanting to avoid duplication, but how do we eliminate barriers and challenges that hinder local food purchasing by institutions and other entities? And that's been a major goal for us, is what barriers and challenges that are out there, and how can we help Virginia and Virginia producers overcome those obstacles. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Spencer so he can finish up in some of the things that we've learned over the past 4 years.
And yeah, I'm just going to wrap it up. I've just got a couple more slides, and again, you all have these slides to look at afterwards. But just some of the current things that we've worked on and past examples. And like while we're not solely responsible for these activities, by convening the group we have, we play a big role in helping develop and move these programs forward through outreach and education and just assistance. Farm to School Week, Farm to Table Assessment Plan that Eric was so involved with, enhancing EBT and SNAP capabilities at farmers markets, outreach to policymakers, which is ongoing, to educate them about the food system. $10 a week initiative has been very successful for us. That's something that's featured on our website. That's something we can refresh in every year. It's something that the consumers can latch onto, and that's been very positive. We're now moving into a 10% initiative aimed at institutions, where hopefully we can get institutions to try and look at purchasing at least perishable vegetables and those types of foods available locally at a 10% level. But that's a way we can hopefully engage institutions at a larger level. We're working on an urban agriculture summit, which will be held next year. And the other thing we hope to do is as food councils develop locally in Virginia, is to hopefully convene meetings among ourselves with all these groups, maybe annually, so we can share things that maybe we can work on together and educate ourselves. just in finishing, a couple take-home thoughts, and everyone sort of, as you look back through where you've come. I mean, and as I've heard the two before us, you know, be open-minded as to who's at the table. It's not who you invite, it's who you don't invite. There's a tremendous amount of interest in this area. Be patient early on. We've been at it for 6 years. It takes a lot of work. And don't be overly ambitious early on. Learn as you go. Adopt 1 or 2 things you want to work on and do them well, and the other work will come. You know, make sure you're engaging everyone that's on your council. We're trying to do that through our committees by clearly defining their roles. Everyone has to serve on a committee. Don't let just a few do all the heavy lifting, or they'll be burnt out. One thing, and we being a statewide council, you know, we always we have to work to understand our entire food system beyond local and regional and even national, and how it interacts with feeding an incredibly growing population, especially on the East Coast. And so just keeping your mind open to you know, how the entire food system works, whether you like certain parts of it or not. Just be cognizant. For us, these are positive opportunities to address issues of food access, economic development. There are a whole variety of things that opportunities that are coming up in the next 20 to 30 years in agriculture, as well as food access, distribution, processing. One size doesn't fit all. Learn from what others are doing. And for us, we have a part-time paid staff. I don't know if we could do it without that person, but funding is always a challenge. So I just would leave you with that. And I want to thank you for the opportunity. And I'm going to turn it back over to Marissa, I think.
Thank you, Spencer and Eric. What I hear from your presentations about the benefits of a statewide food policy council are the breadth and level of comprehensiveness that a statewide food policy can undertake. I hope with these 3 presentations you have learned about the formation and experience of 3 food policy councils at various levels of government, local, county, and state. We hope that through each of these presenters sharing how they formed and some of the activities that they have undertaken, it provides some food for thought on how you can form a food policy council in your community.
So at this point we are ready, this is Marisa again, at this point we are ready to move into question and answer period. And I really just want to thank everyone. We've had a steady stream of questions flowing in. So our presenters, get ready. We have a lot of questions coming your way. But first we have a question for you. So following this presentation, at which level of government do you think it would be most appropriate for your community to start a food policy council? So if you want to go ahead and take a look on your screen, there is a poll that we're wondering, did you come away with this thinking, oh yeah, maybe I would start a food policy council at a certain level of government? So if you could just weigh in, we are really curious to learn. So I was seeing an overwhelming number of folks who are interested in maybe starting a food policy council at the county level. About a third of people interested at the local level, and a smaller percentage at the state level. So great, thanks everyone. This is really, we were really just curious to see what people were thinking. So thank you so much. So at this point, we are ready to roll into questions and answers. And for anyone who has not had the opportunity to ask a question, we invite you to ask questions to any of our panelists or to make comments by typing in the chat box in the GoToMeeting control panel on the right side of the screen. And I will say that if we don't get to all of the questions, which we may be time limited because we've had a lot of questions, we will follow up with individual questions that were not addressed, and we will post the answers online. So panelists, I'm going to unmute all of you, and we are going to go ahead and get started with the questions. So our first question is for Councilman Eric Curran. One of the participants was curious how you recruited members to the Staunton Food Policy Task Force.
Well, we wound up having about 20 members who've cycled in and out. I think about 15 of them are still with us. And we began by just basically me putting together a list of people who I thought would be good. And my criteria were, number one, that they care about food. Number two, that they represent important stakeholders in Staunton, that we be diverse. And number three, that they be willing to serve. So I pretty much approached people. I called them up, and people then gave me recommendations on other people I should talk to. So that's how we got our initial dozen or so folks. But then we started holding public meetings. We had 4 public meetings overall. We've got another one coming up. And at those meetings, we'd get citizens come up and say, boy, this sounds really interesting. How do I get involved? And then we interviewed people and offer them an invitation to join the task force if it seemed like a good fit.
Great, thank you so much. So question for Margaret. We had a lot of folks wondering, how are you paying a stipend to Food Equity Council members?
Well, I had said that we were part of the Port Towns Community Health Partnership, and that's how we were launched. A number of us were members of the Port Towns Community Health Partnership, and we're doing this kind of work and looking at policy and other things. But we were fortunate, as a result of that work, to get 2 major community transformation grants in our county. And one of those grants that was actually awarded to one of our webinar sponsors was able to set aside a bit of those funds for the stipends. So at least for the first year, we have stipends for participants.
Great, thank you so much. So this is a question for Spencer and Eric. This is, we had somebody who was wondering, were there any particular sectors that opposed the formation of a statewide Virginia Food System Council or put up barriers to your formation?
This is Spencer. I would not say opposed as much as skepticism, and I think that's an educational process. As far as certain groups that maybe felt, why did we need another group pursuing policy or that type of thing? And again, that's why we're very much a systematic approach. But the longer we've gone, the more people have embraced us. Our commodity groups will be a challenge, but none of them opposed us to, as far as my knowledge. I think they're just taking a wait-and-see attitude.
I would just add, I think early on we had a lot of participation on the working group in forming the council, and I think many groups were aware of what we were trying to achieve. But I think focusing more on the food system from production to consumption, I think that maybe just seeing the breadth and scope of what we were trying to do might have been a challenge for some groups.
Great, thanks so much. So another question for Councilman Curran. You mentioned in your proposal something to the effect of loosening cottage restrictions, so making it easier for folks to sell food that they prepare in the home. Can you discuss how food safety concerns are being handled, especially for home-based food production?
Well, we weren't actually talking about cooked food. We were talking about letting people sell produce that they grow in their home gardens. And we haven't gotten far enough yet in our proposal to look into the any health issues that might be involved. Where we are at this point is we submitted all those proposals to my colleagues on City Council last week. And now all the colleagues agreed that the proposals could be forwarded to our city manager. We have a council manager form of government. And so our city manager is now shopping the proposals around to different city departments and getting feedback on what they might cost the city to implement, what might be some issues involved, how much staff time they might take up. And then he'll report back to City Council perhaps in November, perhaps in December. And then after that, I think we'll probably dig down deeper into health and other requirements to make these things happen. We do happen to know that one of our proposals, the proposal to incentivize community gardens, it would not actually be legal in the state of Virginia. Virginia follows the so-called Dillon rule, which means that localities like ours can't do anything unless it's already been allowed by the General Assembly. And so the General Assembly, the state has there's no legislation existing that will allow municipalities or local governments to give incentives for community gardens. So that's the kind of thing where we're actually asking City Council for their support for us to go to the state capitol and form a coalition with other local governments that would like to offer incentives to community gardens. So all our proposals are not things we expect to be implemented right away, even if City Council agrees. Some of them are going to be easy to do and could be done right away, but others may take years to come about.
And Marissa, this
Great, thanks.
Marissa, this is Eric. I was just going to add, I'm not sure where the question came from, but our Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services and I think the Department of Health, they've tried to work with people on labeling issues that if a product's been prepared in an uninspected kitchen, in some cases that food can be labeled as that sometimes in situations just to make the consumers and buyers aware of that. So we do try to protect food safety, but I think also trying to encourage the entrepreneurship. So I think it's a balance there.
Wonderful, thank you. So we had somebody who wanted to see the Virginia Food System Council vision and mission again. So I'm just going to put those up here for a second. I'll leave them up each for like a minute and then scroll to the next. But in the meanwhile, we have a question that I think we're going to talk to you, Margaret. So somebody was wondering, how do you justify the use of land for urban agriculture and community gardening rather than for development, for things like housing or building?
Yeah, I just had some thoughts about that because when I first started working on urban agriculture, what we thought about was that it was we could begin by suggesting it as an interim land use. And it certainly depends on the city and the amount of land there is and so on. In Prince George's County, we have a tremendous amount of land. Everywhere I go, I look at that land, I catalog it, and there are many, many places where there are lawns and other kinds of things where we could be growing food. But I think it's an interim land uses, we could say 10 years, 15 years, where food can grow until there is enough money or until that area is redeveloped. But in many cities, what happens is there are blighted areas that kind of cycle through. So you can, there are ways of shifting or changing where food is grown in order to accommodate land availability. But for the most part, I think that it's really important to argue that growing food's not really a temporary use of land, and that food access issues are not going away. There's not going to be a post-food society. And what's changed and what is a problem with our food system is that food travels hundreds of miles before it gets to us, and there are many, many hands that touch our food, probably many more than ever are touched when you have a small cottage industry where food is grown and done in your kitchen. So I'd say that we have an untenable and unsafe food system. And we have to look at how to build green spaces into our cities and green belts around our cities. And I think that we cannot any longer say that food is marginal to our economy, or that it's
Wonderful.
going to be grown somewhere else.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're going to wrap up with just one more question because many people have asked it, but I wanted to share a couple things. So after the question and answer period, we have a number of resources to share with folks, so make sure you stick around for just a couple more minutes. And then also, if we did not get to your question, we will follow up with you because we can see who asked the question, so we'll be sure to do that. And then also, there will be a link to this recording and to the slides that we will send out in a follow-up email. So now the last question, I want to start with Spencer and Eric from the Virginia Food System Council, because you have a part-time staff dedicated to the Virginia Food System Council. So many, and then Eric, Curran, and Margaret, if you would like to chime in too, many people have been asking, how do you fund your Food Policy Council or task force, and how do you staff it? So if you want to start with that, Spencer and Eric, we'd really appreciate it.
Spencer, I can start. I think early on we were fortunate that after the Food Security Summit that really did have the buy-in from universities like Virginia Tech, Virginia State University, UVA, and then also other participating organizations like Virginia Farm Bureau, Virginia Association for Biological Farming Association, and many others that were part that provided sort of in-kind contributions of meeting space or maybe helping with office supplies or other ways that were real resources. And then, as we developed, we were able to actually write a grant, a 2-year grant, and as part of that grant, we were able to hire somebody on a part-time basis. I think that is probably a challenge for any type of council that you form, because there are real needs. And I think, as we've learned, the harder that you work, the more work you create. And so, I think staffing is definitely something that's needed, particularly as councils mature.
And like Eric, I'll just be brief. Like Eric said, I mean, it was a 2-year grant that's set to expire before long, and we look at grant programs all day long, and a lot of them are so program specific. They may not be exactly what we're doing, but for us to be successful in that, we're statewide, we all have other duties, as do everyone on other food councils. For us to not have someone that can facilitate and coordinate and do all that would just be a real challenge for us to continue. So that I wish there was an easier way to find funding, but it's an ongoing challenge.
And I think we've been fortunate that our vision and mission actually falls in with the vision and missions of many of our participating organizations. So members and participants and directors have been able to justify their time commitment to the council, because it is forwarding the missions of all of the participating organizations.
This is Eric Curran from Staunton. I'd like to chime in.
Okay.
Staunton is the kind of place, we don't have a lot of corporate headquarters or government offices, so in a way we've been in the post-money economy for a long time. We've had to rely on ourselves, and it's a big town of volunteers, and it's a big town of people sponsoring stuff. So we haven't let a lack of funds stand in the way of doing something that we felt was important. All our members are volunteers. They don't get any stipends. They all have full-time jobs, as do I, and we meet in the evenings on a volunteer basis, and whatever stuff we need, we've gotten donated. Our members are very generous. One of them runs a grocery store, another runs a food service operation, and they've donated meals and refreshments for our public events. We have people who donate publicity and people who donate time to stand at booths. So I think if you're doing something that is exciting to the community, and if you can present it in a way that seems relevant and seems like it solves community problems, but also gives people a chance to participate in their local democracy, because I think people are cynical about government, especially after what happens in Washington. And they want some level of government in which they can make a difference. And if you show them they can make a difference on the local level, people's enthusiasm and generosity will overwhelm you. And so I don't think lack of budget should be a reason to hold off on starting a food task force or a food policy council. I think you can do it by just, going around the community and shaking people's hands and getting people excited about your effort.
And I just want, this is Margaret. Yeah.
If you want to go ahead
Is there
for
another
1 minute,
question?
then we're going to kick off the webinar. So go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to say that it is certainly true that we can do a lot of things without money. I think that when you have money, it's important to figure out what's the best use of that money. And so when we were talking about supporting people who don't ordinarily participate or for whom participation is an obstacle, that is an excellent way to spend that money. We have that plus a part-time person who will be heading our council for the first year.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for the robust question and answer period. We really appreciate all the questions you had, and we'll be getting back to folks to address the questions that we didn't have. So with all of this information and a lot of questions answered, we hope that you are inspired to take action in your municipality. And in order to do so, we want to make you aware of a number of resources available to you. So in the interest of time, I've had this resource slide up, but here you'll find links to more information about each of the food policy councils that was represented today. And so a lot of folks had questions about the map, the food policy census, so that can be found at the link at the bottom of this page at markwhinney.com. Additionally, for our Mid-Atlantic participants, I want to, for our Mid-Atlantic participants as well as participants in California, Colorado, and Oregon, we welcome you to contact the Healthy Eating, Active Living Cities and Towns campaign, which provides free resources and support to local elected officials and executive municipal staff on policies that promote access to affordable, nutritious foods. So for folks who might live in those states or work in those states, I really encourage you to reach out to the HEAL regional coordinators and utilize them as a resource, especially because I know a lot of the questions that folks had were about funding, and there are funded staff in each of these states who can potentially help you and help your local elected officials. So within the next week, we ask you to please be on the lookout for a link to the recording of the webinar. We will also post it online as well as the slides from today's webinar on 2 websites. So the Institute for Public Health Innovations website, which is www.institutephi.org, and you can also find it at the HEAL Cities and Towns Mid-Atlantic website, which is www.healcitiesmidatlantic.org. On behalf of the Institute for Public Health Innovation, thank you to each one of our speakers, and thank you to each one of our participants for joining us and taking time to participate in our webinar. We hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.